I'm Maud, and until I turned 33, the most exciting thing in my life was when the accounting firm I worked for switched from PC to Mac. Not exactly thrilling, right? But then everything changed at a friend's birthday party. That night, I stood in the corner of a cramped living room, holding a soda and feeling uncomfortable in my too-tight dress. The music was loud, way too loud for talking, but perfect for him, Charles. He was taller than most people, which is probably why he saw me. He walked over with confidence that made my heart skip a beat. "Hey, you're Maud, right?" His voice was clear, even over the loud bass. Yeah, and you are?" I sipped my drink, trying to look calm. "Charles, I see you around. Mind if I join you?" He didn't wait for an answer, just stood next to me. "Not at all," I said, my voice nearly drowned out by the latest pop song blaring through the speakers. "So Maud, what brings you here tonight?" he asked, leaning in. His tone was casual, but his eyes were intense. "Just here to celebrate Jessica's birthday. You know her long?" "Yeah, went to college with her. She keeps inviting me to these things. Can't say no, can I?" We laughed, and it felt natural, easy. "I get it. I work with her. She's kind of hard to say no to." "An accountant, right?" She mentioned it. He nodded like he already knew. "That's right. Numbers are my game," I joked, even though I usually found nothing funny about spreadsheets. "Sounds thrilling," he grinned, and I couldn't tell if he was teasing me or not. "Oh, absolutely. It's all wild parties and high stakes in the accounting world." We laughed again, and I felt at the ease of talking to someone genuinely interested in what I had to say. It was new, exciting, and a bit scary. "You want to grab some air?" he suggested, nodding towards the backyard. I nodded, grateful to escape the noise. Outside, the cool air was a relief. "So, what's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Just looking for a good time, I guess, and maybe someone cool to hang out with," he said with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. We talked about everything and nothing: movies, books we liked, how he was into graphic design, but stuck in a corporate job he didn't love. It felt like we'd known each other for years. As the night wound down, he pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? I'd really like to see you again, Maud." I hesitated, not used to this kind of attention, but something about him felt right. "Sure," I said, typing my number into his phone. He smiled, his whole face lighting up. "Great, I'll call you. We should go out, just the two of us." "Sounds good." I managed my stomach doing flips. I watched him go, a part of me still in disbelief that this was my life now. Maybe turning 33 wasn't so bad after all. Maybe it was just the start of something truly great. The days after Charles' call felt like a blur. Before I knew it, I was getting ready for our first date. My nerves were all over the place since I didn't have much experience in this area. I chose a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but hoped it would do the trick. Charles picked me up at 7 sharp. His car was a clean, well-kept sedan. Nothing flashy, but it suited him. As I got in, he flashed me a smile that could knock you sideways. "You look great, Maud." "Thanks," I mumbled, my face probably red as a tomato. "You look nice too." Dinner was at this cozy little French place he knew. The food smelled amazing, but my stomach was doing somersaults. We ordered pasta, him with some fancy sauce and me with plain old marinara. "So Maud, tell me something about you that no one else knows," he said, twirling his spaghetti expertly onto his fork. I chuckled, playing with my food more than eating it. "Well, I'm pretty boring, but I guess not everyone knows I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute." He raised his eyebrows. "Really now? That's pretty cool. You'll have to show me sometime." "Sure," I said, starting to relax a little. "What about you? Any hidden talents?" "I make a mean breakfast burrito," he boasted with a grin. "Best you'll ever have." "I'll take your word for it. Maybe you can prove it sometime." I teased. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We saw each other constantly. Charles would come over after work, and I'd meet him for lunch near his office. He showed me his favorite spots around town, little nooks I'd never noticed before. It was like seeing the city for the first time. Things took a serious turn when he invited me to meet his parents, Brian and Camille. They lived in a small, cozy house full of photos and little decorations. Camille hugged me the second we walked in. "Oh, we've heard so much about you, dear," she said, squeezing my shoulders. "She's lovely," Charles said, and I could tell he was pleased. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was nonstop. "So, Maud, Charles tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting," Brian said, passing me the potatoes. "It has its moments," I replied. "Mostly just numbers, but I like the order of it." "And how's your family?" Camille asked, genuinely interested. "They're good, thanks. My dad's a businessman, always busy, but he's been really supportive of me. It was all happening fast, but it felt right. It was as if everything in my life had been leading up to this meeting. Charles feeling like someone finally saw me for who I was, not just some plain Jane accountant." One evening, a few months into our whirlwind romance, we were walking along the riverbank. The city lights reflected off the water, and it was pretty in a postcard kind of way. "Maud, I've been thinking," he started, stopping and facing me. "Yeah?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "I don't want to wait any longer. I know this is fast, but will you marry me?" Just like that, my world changed. No hesitation, no doubt, just a simple, "Yes, Charles, I'll marry you." The whirlwind didn't stop there. Soon after, I introduced Charles to my father. He took to Charles immediately, appreciating his straightforward manner and obvious affection for me. "He's a good man, Maud," Dad said, giving his approval, which meant the world to me. So we got married. It was a modest wedding, nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect for us. I even found myself loving the way I looked in my wedding dress, something I'd never imagined. Smiling wide, I posted photos on my social media, sharing my joy with friends and family. After the wedding, life didn't slow down, it picked up pace. Charles and I barely had time to savor our newlywed bliss before he suggested something big. "Hey Maud, I've been thinking," he said one evening as we unpacked another box of wedding gifts in our cramped apartment. "How about we move in with my folks?" I paused, holding a coffee mug in my hand. "Live with your parents?" He nodded, looking serious. "Yeah, they're not getting any younger, and I'd feel better if we were around to help out. Plus, it would save us some money on rent." It made sense, but moving in with the in-laws, that was sitcom territory. "Are you sure they'd want us there all the time?" "Absolutely," he assured me. "Mom's been hinting about it ever since we got engaged. Come on, it'll be good." 3 weeks later, there we were, pulling up to his parents' house with our lives packed into a bunch of boxes. Charles's mom, Camille, was waving from the porch before we even got out of the car. "Oh, Maud, we're so thrilled to have you both here," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was a bit too tight. Brian, Charles's dad, clapped him on the back. "Welcome home, son, and you too, Maud." The house was cozy, stuffed with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum of the 1973s. I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I was already missing our little apartment. Charles sensed my hesitation. "It's going to be great, you'll see," he whispered as we carried boxes inside. The first few days were an adjustment. Camille was constantly hovering, always popping into our room to ask if we needed anything. "Just making sure you're comfortable," she'd chirp, while I tried not to cringe at the invasion of privacy. One evening, we all sat down for dinner: Charles, me, Brian, and Camille. The conversation was painfully mundane until Charles dropped another bomb. "So the house needs some major repairs," he announced casually between bites of meatloaf. I choked on my mashed potatoes. "Repairs?" "Yeah, the roof's a mess, and the plumbing's from the dark ages," he said. Brian nodded solemnly. "We were thinking," Charles continued, avoiding my gaze, that maybe we could all chip in for the costs. I glanced at Camille, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. All of us. Well, I just got this pay cut at work, Charles muttered, so I'm a bit strapped at the moment. There it was. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I'll see what I can do, I managed to say, even though I wanted to say much more. Camille perked up, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, Maud, that would be so helpful. You're such an angel. The next few weeks were a blur of contractors and repairs. I wrote checks and smiled through gritted teeth as Camille gushed about how wonderful the house was looking. Brian slapped me on the back. You're really part of the family now, Maud. Part of the family, sure, the part that pays for everything. One particularly grueling day, after yet another round of expensive decisions, I felt completely drained. I collapsed on our bed, exhausted. Charles came in and sat beside me. Thanks for handling all this, Maud, he said, sounding almost sincere. It's fine, I lied, staring at the ceiling. I just didn't realize how much it would be. He squeezed my hand. It'll all be worth it. This is for our future, right? Our future, I echoed, not sure whose future we were building anymore. As I lay there listening to Charles's steady breathing, I couldn't help but wonder if moving in was the right decision. But there was no going back now. I was in this deep and had to see it through, whatever the cost. After the renovations, the house looked great, like something out of a magazine. Despite the financial strain, I felt a bit of pride looking around. We decided to throw a small dinner party to celebrate, just the four of us. That's when everything took an unexpected turn. We were in the middle of dinner, laughing and sharing stories, when Camille suddenly got quiet. The room felt heavy all of a sudden. She looked at Brian, then at us, and her eyes were teary. We need to tell you both something important, she said, her voice shaky. Charles and I exchanged looks. What's going on? I asked, my stomach tightening. Brian took a deep breath. The house? It's mortgaged, heavily mortgaged. We owe $300,000, and the bank could take it away if we don't settle the debt in 3 months. My fork clattered to my plate. What? You mean all the repairs we just paid for? Camille started sobbing. We were ashamed and thought we could manage it, but after the repairs and everything, there's just no way. I felt like I was in a bad dream. All the money, all the effort, and it was for a house that wasn't even secure. So, what are you saying now? My voice was sharper than I intended. Well, Charles started, his eyes avoiding mine. I was hoping maybe, Maud, you could talk to your father. Are you serious? I snapped, my voice rising. Ask my dad for $300,000? It's just, after his help, the house would be secure for us, for our future, Charles pleaded. Camille's sobbing grew louder, making me feel like the villain in this crazy drama. Please, Maud, it's our home. We've spent decades in this house. I was furious, but the tears and the pleading wore me down. I'll think about it, I finally muttered, feeling trapped. The next day, I called my dad, hesitantly explaining the situation. To my surprise, he agreed to help, but on one condition. I'll give the money, Maud, but only with a formal agreement, a receipt. I want everything documented. When I told Charles about my dad's condition, he wasn't happy. Why does it have to be so formal? Can't he just trust us? It's $300,000, Charles. It's a lot of money, and he's just being cautious, I argued, feeling the distance between us grow. He'll get his paperwork, Charles muttered, clearly annoyed. The paperwork was drawn up, and the money was transferred. Camille and Brian were relieved, constantly thanking me, but the air between Charles and me had changed. There was a coldness that wasn't there before. Just when I thought my life couldn't get any darker, tragedy struck suddenly. Maud, it's your Kayla, it signs. Her voice came through the line shaky and choked. Your dad, he had a heart attack. It's bad. My heart dropped to my stomach. What? How is he? He didn't make it. Honey, I'm so sorry. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. No, that can't be right. I mumbled, numb. I hung up and turned to find Charles standing in the doorway. What's wrong? He asked, his voice low. My dad, he's gone. I managed to say before everything inside me broke and I started sobbing. Charles came over and put his arm around me, but it felt like being hugged by a stranger. I'm sorry, Maud, he said, and it sounded sincere, but I was too lost in my grief to really hear him. Exhausted from another long day of funeral planning and dealing with the agency, I came home earlier than usual. I expected the house to be quiet, but as I inserted my key into the front door, I heard voices from the living room. It was Charles, his tone dripping with frustration and disgust, talking to his parents. I can't do this anymore. Living with her is driving me nuts. It's too much, Charles complained. His mom, usually so sweet and understanding, replied in a stern whisper, You have to hold on a bit longer, Charles. We need to figure out what to do with those receipts your father-in-law had. Maud has them now. The sooner I get out, the better. I'll grab those receipts and destroy them, and then I'll start all over again with that rich beauty I told you about. Charles's voice was cold and calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. Here I was mourning my father, while the people I thought I could trust were plotting behind my back. I realized the family I lived with was plotting behind my back. They weren't the loving family I thought I married into. Instead, they saw me as a way to fix their financial troubles. Rage mixed with shock, but I knew I had to keep my cool. So I slammed the door loudly as if I had just come in, disrupting their scheming. Oh, Maud, you're back early. How did everything go with the funeral plans? Camille's voice shifted instantly to one of concern, her eyes wide with fake innocence. I forced a smile, my stomach turning. It's all coming together. Thanks for asking. As I spoke, I could see the quick glances they shot each other, their faces a mask of fake concern. It made my skin crawl knowing their true colors. But I realized that showing my cards now wouldn't help. I needed to be smart. I needed to protect what was mine and possibly even get some justice for their deceit. The funeral was somber, the air heavy with grief and murmured condolences. But as the ceremony wrapped up and we returned to Charles's parents' house, the true colors of the family I married into began to show. As we gathered in the living room, sipping on lukewarm coffee, Charles's demeanor shifted. His usually charming facade crumbled away, revealing something more sinister. With a cold laugh, he looked straight at me and dropped the bomb. Maud, pack your things. You need to get out. I've got someone else now, someone better. His words should have felt like a slap. I pretended to be stunned, but before I could respond, Camille chimed in with a snide giggle. We've really had enough of you, dear. We only put up with you for your money. What about the house? I asked, feigning innocence. The house that I paid to fix, the $300,000 I poured into it. Camille laughed harder, as if I'd told the best joke of the year. Oh, sweetie, this house is ours. You're nothing here. Charles's smirk widened. And those receipts you're so proud of. Found them in your dad's house and burned them. They're gone. For a moment, I let them believe they had won, but then I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter, my reaction confusing them, their smiles faltering. Why are you laughing? What's so funny? Charles demanded. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. You three are just pathetic. You think you're so clever. The receipts you destroyed, they were copies. The real ones are safe with my lawyer. The color drained from their faces. Charles's arrogance turned to panic. You can't prove anything, he stammered. I can, and I will. I shot back, my voice steady and firm. Now, I want my money back, all of it, or my next call is to the police. Charles and Brian looked at each other, their earlier confidence replaced by fear. Brian, usually so bold and brash, began to plead. Maud, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out. With the truth out and leverage in my hands, negotiations with Charles and his parents dragged on longer than I expected. It was clear they were trying every angle to sway the terms in their favor, but I wasn't about to budge. "Look, it's simple," I stated firmly during one of our many discussions at their now legally mine kitchen table. "The house gets transferred to my name in exchange for the money. That's the deal. No more games." Finally, they relented. We all agreed that the best course of action was to make everything official and legal. I insisted that everything be documented by a lawyer and confirmed with the proper papers. "I want no corners cut," I emphasized. At the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense as documents were signed and notarized. I watched closely as each signature was applied, ensuring there was no room for further deceit. Once everything was finalized, I collected the documents related to the transfer and turned to Charles's mother, who looked deflated yet somehow still carried a hint of her former haughtiness. "I'll be keeping these in a safe place," I said, holding up the papers before slipping them into a folder, just to ensure no one is tempted to pull any stunts. With the legalities handled, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Charles was quiet, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a chapter closed. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch of my now fully owned house and watched Charles, his mom, and Dad carry their belongings to a rental van. Their movements were slow, the mood somber. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage ending, but under the circumstances, it was the best possible outcome. After everything settled down and I began to enjoy my newfound peace, word got back to me through friends about Charles and his situation. Apparently, the grass wasn't greener on the other side. His mistress had dumped him not long after our divorce, and his parents were now crammed into a tiny apartment, a big downgrade from the comfortable house they once had. It seemed karma had caught up with them quicker than I expected. Despite their situation, they started reaching out to me, bombarding me with calls and messages, probably hoping to weasel their way back into my life or at least my house. But I was done with their deceit. I blocked their numbers without a second thought and blacklisted them on all social media. It was liberating to cut the final threads that connected us. One afternoon, as I was enjoying a quiet moment with a book in my living room, there was a knock at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Charles standing there, a pathetic figure holding a bouquet of flowers. The audacity of it made me scoff. Opening the door, I couldn't help but laugh outright at the sight of him. "Really, Charles? Flowers?" He shuffled uncomfortably, the bouquet seeming to wilt along with his spirits. "Maud, I've realized so many things. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Remember when you told me I disgusted you?" I interrupted, leaning against the doorframe, not hiding my amusement at his discomfort. "What changed, Charles? Run out of options?" He looked down, the shame clear on his face. I made mistakes, but I'm here to make things right." I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for him. "Almost. You're not here to make things right, Charles. You're just desperate to get back to your comfortable life. But guess what? That life doesn't exist anymore, not for you." His face fell, and he took a step back as if my words were physical blows. "Maud, please." "Save it," I cut him off sharply. "I want you to leave. Don't come back here. We're done. Forever." Charles stood there for a second longer, his hope visibly crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. I returned to my book, feeling a sense of finality and relief. I smiled to myself, feeling the quiet of the house wrap around me like a comforting blanket. It was such a stark contrast to the chaos that once filled this space. The constant noise, the tension, the deceit, all of it was gone now. I could finally breathe deeply without the weight of worry on my chest. I was finally at peace, living life on my terms. I glanced around the room, taking in the calm atmosphere. The sun streamed in through the windows, casting a warm glow over everything. I realized how much I loved this house now that it was truly mine. The walls, once witnesses to arguments and schemes, now seemed to echo with serenity and contentment. I thought back to the days of turmoil and manipulation, remembering how trapped I felt. Charles and his family had taken so much from me, both emotionally and financially. But now, they were out of my life for good. No bouquet of flowers or sweet talk could change that. Their attempts to manipulate me were over. As I sipped my tea and returned to my book, I felt a sense of triumph. I had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but I had come out stronger on the other side. I had taken control of my life and my future. The peace I felt now was well-earned and deeply cherished. I was truly finally free. Free from lies, free from deceit, and free to live my life as I chose. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities and opportunities. I smiled again, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready for it.